Welcome to Newsmaker Sunday, the just concluded and rather rapid legislative session here in Arizona. There was a lot of talk in it, of course, dealing with schools. And the bottom line was basically a new state budget, per pupil funding increase, but the state cut money to schools for capital needs. So it was a bit of a shell game, and in the end, nobody is happy. To talk about it today on Newsmaker Sunday is Chuck Essigs. He's on the far right of your screen. Well, what would it be? Left of your screen, right? I'm backwards here, Chuck. Chuck is an education expert par excellence. He is a lobbyist dealing with education at the legislature and knows the money and the funding formulas better than probably anybody I've ever met. Eileen Sigmund is the president and CEO of the Arizona Charter Schools Association. She's also an attorney and one of the sharpest knives in the drawer, actually, that I've met on this education issue. Both helped me through the governor debate that I moderated. What was that, back in September? End of September? And we got through it. Let's start with you, Chuck. The session ended. The governor promised to put more money in classrooms. But in the end, we ended up with less money, right?
Well, it was close. What happened is they did increase the funding formula for operational expenses, but they made additional reductions to the capital funding, which when you net it out, schools have a slight loss, but they came in pretty close to breaking even, which is not bad when you look at the last couple of years with the bigger cuts.
So could you say that the governor kept his promise as to what he wanted to do?
I think he tried. But remember, the state had a $600 million deficit. So how can you, because when you talk to some legislators, they say, look how well we did. We kept schools even. We didn't cut them anymore with that huge deficit.
Eileen, you're president of the Charter Schools Association. Now, going into this, you would have thought, well, Doug Ducey is, he would lean toward more charter schools, help the charter schools. This is the way of the future. That didn't happen, did it?
We were surprised during this session. When the budget language came out, there was a change in school finance law that had been in existence for 20 years. And there was a change late at night in the budget. And so we were trying to work through this with the governor's office and the legislature because it has wide-ranging, reverberating impact. And what essentially happens then is the bond market, in the way we fund our facilities, doesn't like quick, rapid change. They like predictability. They like stability. So it was there was a cut, and there's still some reverberating impacts.
Eileen Klein, who was chief of staff to Brewer, and she's now, the president of the Board of Regents. She was sitting right in that very seat. She's upset about the funding for higher education that was slashed. What is going on in Arizona with education? I mean, I think the public is starting to say, look, why do we pass these overrides? And then they come back to us and say, well, I know we passed the override in your district and you guys did a nice job getting the vote out, but we're still spinning our wheels because the state cut us some more. We're not getting beyond this. And is money the whole issue here?
Well, you have to look at the state general fund, which is where the money comes from to run state government.
We're spending a fifth, right, on K through 12, a fifth of our budget?
We'll probably spend a little bit more than that. Right. Probably spend about 40-some% on K-12 education. But the budget is not large enough, in my opinion, to support all the things that the state needs to do. Community colleges in Pima County and Maricopa County are now fully funded locally. They lost all their state funding. Universities got hit. There's just not enough money in the general fund to do the things that are necessary for especially for public education in this state.
We talked about this in the governor debate. Does more dollars equate to better outcomes?
So I think it's a combination. Governor Ducey is making K-12 funding and excellence for our students. Those two priorities, his priority. So we're about to have a school funding task force that the governor declared it right when he came out. And what the governor is talking about is, he's not talking about charter district. He is really saying the bar is what works for students and what does not.
In terms of funding?
In terms of outcomes.
Oh, outcomes, okay.
And funding. So the governor has talked about the achievement district or the achievement zone, wanting to say this is what works in public schools, both charter and district, and we want to expand what works. And so where I believe we are, we want to be able to be a resource, and we want to give the governor some time. He inherited a terrible situation, and the legislature was trying to right that ship.
But we need to start looking at what's adequate for funding education in the state. If you just look at operational expenses, there's 46 other states that spend more per pupil than we do. When you look at total revenue, there's 47 states that spend more per pupil than we do. So we're right at the very bottom. And one thing I think is the strongest argument, Eileen and I can both sit here today and say that the people we represent strongly believe there's not enough money to do the things that schools need to do for students in the state.
You know, and
both charters and districts are in agreement on that.
And then conversely, you've got tremendous amounts of money that go into, I think they're 1 and 2, New York and Maryland. And look at what's going on in Baltimore right now. Everybody says, hey, look, if the kids had more opportunity and if we funded this better, we wouldn't have these problems. And look at, and Maryland is funded. New York's funded. The outcomes aren't that great.
I just think more money, but what doesn't mean better schools. But if it's, when you look at the needs in Arizona and the things that schools need to do in terms of increasing teacher compensation, having smaller class sizes, we have a whole bunch of students that are at risk in traditional districts and in charter schools that need additional help. So we're never going to get to New York, we're never going to get to Maryland,
right.
But we ought to at least get to a level where we have adequate funding and charter schools and districts can say we have the funding we need to do the things that need to be done for students. If we do it right, we have enough money.
Let's look at tape 1, just kids in class, and I'm thinking in Arizona, we've just had and teachers are overwhelmed, and there's just, we seem to be not able to move ahead. But charters have come in, and we are the leader in the country, are we not, with charter schools?
Yes.
And you get tremendous outcomes in a lot of these charter schools.
We do. Today is the start of National Charter School Week, and we have some of the best, absolute best schools in the country. We also have New Schools for Phoenix, where we're working with leaders for our high poverty schools to make sure that we're getting leaders and teachers, and we're seeing some great outcomes.
How are you doing it differently that maybe traditional, I mean, you are public education,
right?
But traditional K through 12 could learn from?
So Chuck and I, we talk about this, and I think there's a lot of agreement that our money, when it comes into charters, it's not as flexible and fungible as it was 20 years ago when we started charters, but we do have a lot of local decisions that can be deployed, and the decision can be made really at a community level and quickly change to meet and adapt what we're seeing in our community, what may be changing. So for example, we have a high refugee population in some of our schools, and our school leaders can bring in various experts to deal with a Somalia refugee, a Syrian refugee. And so that's something that we'd like to see that has worked in charters, that we'd like to see districts have that ability.
So that would be tougher in a district to try to pull that off and do it quickly, to see
Absolutely.
a need and do it.
Well, they need more flexibility in their use of monies, but we have like University High in Tucson,
Right.
Basis School, we have some schools that are focused on college prep students and are doing very, very well. But all of those schools, even the Basis School, is saying they need additional resources. That's why
I think we've got 260 districts, school districts in Arizona.
about 230.
Yes.
230 now?
Yeah.
Does that suggest that we have too many and that that's a problem and that we duplicate a lot of stuff and waste a lot of money because of too many districts?
Well,
So-
we have 400, 500 charter schools.
Right. So there's an alignment issue that happens. So for example, in Phoenix area, we have 13 K-8 districts with 120 schools that feed into 15 high schools. So you have 13 different superintendents whose job is to get the students to and through 8th grade. Well then, you have Ken Scribner who's doing a great job at high school. That connection between 8th and 9th grade isn't always as seamless as we want. And then into that mix, we have about 80 charter schools that are different configurations. And so working together, talking together, collaborating together, really about saying, this is that student, these are the records, this is a strength and weakness. We'd love to see that seamless.
What's happening at the legislature right now that is the problem with funding? I mean, obviously, we just don't have the revenues coming in. That's the biggie, right? So if revenues increase, do you suspect we wouldn't be in this crisis?
I think that's the biggest problem facing the legislature is they want to improve things for schools, especially some of the real strong advocates. The money just isn't there in the state general fund.
Democrats, Republicans, there's consensus
it's not there in the
that they
state
want
general
to-
fund.
Yeah. And
So,
it just
so we
doesn't
need to
exist.
somehow get additional resources from other sources dedicated to K-12 education.
Now, because of the supermajority requirement to raise taxes, right?
All the taxes that got cut over the years, when we had a lot of money in the state general fund, we cut taxes because they didn't need all those resources. When we had limited growth in the state, we cut taxes because that would lead to more economic growth.
Right.
That takes a simple majority, takes a supermajority
To undo it.
To undo it.
To
And
raise taxes
And that's
again.
not going to happen.
So this leaves you.
And let me
well,
just
go
give you
ahead.
another point. Only about 17% of the whole state of Arizona is privately owned. And so our diversified tax revenue base is really at a smaller level than other states. So in the East Coast, they don't have only a 17% privately owned. So we have a lot of federal land, state trust land. So that's something that is a problem. We charters are only funded from the state general fund. We'd love to see a more diversified revenue source.
Okay, so that leads me to the conclusion that the only way out is through a citizens initiative.
You're brilliant.
Well,
Because
thank
it
you,
is.
Chuck.
It doesn't, you know,
I don't
anybody
see
who
any other
takes a
way.
look at it, if you have one major source of revenue, which is the state general fund, which is tapped out, and it's not about the only group that kind of does okay is prisons because of the concern of the public for safety and things
Right.
like that. But all the universities got hit really, really hard. Community colleges got hit really hard. Traditional districts didn't gain the ground.
And everything else is mandated.
And
you
and
don't really have the flexibility on health care and other spending.
But
You
we're
don't.
leaving out the governor's school finance task force that should be convening. He did an executive order. Preliminary results are September 1st, final are December 1st. We're hoping to see a pathway of hope through
That sounds like a campaign slogan, a pathway of hope.
We need it. Our leaders need it.
Is
Our-
that going to end up
our
on
teachers
some
need it.
literature somewhere?
I don't know. Our teachers, when I talk to my teachers, they're like, where's the pathway? And I'm like, it's a pathway of hope. It'll be there. I mean,
And you believe that's coming. You think we're going to figure this thing out.
we at least need to hear and give some time. I think what happened during this legislative session, the fastest in 50 years, is there was pain. The pain was going to come in. It was going to come in quick.
Why was it so fast? Was it to not allow all the forces to marshal against what was going to happen?
Well, I think you had a legislature and a governor who were going step by step together to solve the problem. They didn't have money to add. They had money. They had to make cuts. It's easier to make the cuts when you do them quickly and work through
Because
there or
otherwise
whatever.
you have, and we saw it, protests down at the Capitol about what you're cutting. If you do it quickly, nobody has time to really marshal.
And if you don't have any money, why spend hundreds and hundreds of days fighting over something that isn't there to start with? So I think it's, but I don't, you know, I look at it a little bit different than Eileen. No matter what the task force comes up to in terms of how you change the formula, it's kind of like your TV station. If you're going to expand, you're going to need more resources to expand.
Right.
And schools are going to need more resources to correct problems with the formula. It's
And-
good to look at it, but you're going to need more money. The inflation lawsuit, and that
We haven't
one,
even talked about that.
but the governor wants to solve it. The school districts want to solve it.
That is-
Charter schools want to solve it.
That is how much now? That's 317.
333 million.
Over
333
330 million. And that's for the back pay.
This is what the legislature didn't fund during the downturn.
That's what the
Right.
argument.
So they're saying, look, you owe us this money and inflation on it, but they're giving up some of those things, right?
Well, the money isn't there in the general fund to
Right.
fund it, so we're going to have to find a way of funding that if we want to move forward. And that's just to meet inflation. That's just to have schools keep pace with inflation.
Or
That's
growth, student growth.
Not to do a lot of
and
extra
I know
things.
We're in the weeds a little bit on the funding, but the money is a big key in all of this, and I think you'll get agreement from a lot of folks in the education world that that's essential. That we just aren't funding basic stuff. And you may have seen that in your own districts. We're going to take a break here on Newsmaker Sunday. When we come back, I want you guys to briefly handicap Governor Ducey, how he's done so far, and the new state school superintendent. Diane.
I can't leave during the break, can I?
No. You could. But I'd have to drag you back.
Okay, all right, okay.
But we're going to talk about that and more on Newsmaker Sunday and how we fix this problem, because Arizona's education system is not running quite as well as I think the citizens probably expect and want. We'll talk about it on Newsmaker Sunday. I'm going to try to get my geography right here. We're talking education in Arizona and the crisis in funding that we've been talking about, it seems like forever. Chuck Essigs is on the left of your screen. He is the education expert, lobbyist, a guy who understands the financing of education probably better than anyone I know. Eileen Sigmund is the president and CEO of the Arizona Charter Schools Association. Charter schools are still flourishing here. It was rapid growth. Five Symington really ushered in this kind of open door, let's do this thing. Do the charters, I mean, I'm going to tee it up for you, but do the charters do it better and cheaper than the regular schools can do it?
So in the law, charters are mandated to improve student achievement and provide parents a choice. Nowhere in the law does it say they must do more with less. However, the funding has proven that point, because we in the charter sector only get money from the state general fund. So on average, we don't have access to property taxes. We do get less.
That's right. You can't run overrides like these other districts do.
Bonds, overrides, desegregate. There's all these buckets of funding. It's not to say that both charters and district teachers are not receiving the pay increases and the other professional acknowledgement you'd want to see. But charters, with today being the start of National Charter School Week, in Arizona, 73% in the last letter grade either earned an A or B or increased their letter grade.
Chuck, you've watched this for how many years now that you've been involved in education?
30.
Charters on balance do you think that they have pushed the schools, the public schools, and I realize these terms, because it's a public school, the charter is, but the traditional public schools, has it pushed them and has that competition made the schools better?
I think competition has made the schools better. The thing you need to be a little careful is when you compare traditional school districts and charters, you need to look at the whole system. And University High in Tucson, there's some high schools in this state that are very, very high achieving in traditional school districts.
Right. Is this because of better, more engaged parents? Socioeconomic reasons? What? Well,
when you have students who have more ability and have more motivation and stuff like that. So I think you need to look at the total systems. And when you look at the total systems, it's not like charters far surpass traditional school districts when you look at them as a whole system. But they do have some that are really high achieving. And we need to try and replicate that, but we also need to understand that there's a lot of charters and there's traditional school districts that are dealing with at-risk students, which are a whole different challenge. Right. And a whole different way of educating those kids.
And I think 10% of our
successful.
students in Arizona do not speak English as a first language. So that presents.
I think it's higher than 10%.
Is it higher than 10?
I think so, yes.
Yes. I was like, whoa, 10%? I think that's
really?
kind of low.
Well, maybe 10% are here illegally. So that's a number. But then the number of people where English is not a first language. What is that number then?
You know what? I'd have to get back to you on that, John. But I just know that we are.
So it's more than 1 in 10.
I'd have to get back.
It's certainly more than 1 in 10 for kids who are at risk.
Right.
At risk for sure.
Sure, definitely.
Right, because that.
And
with
that's
that
a
in
big
mind,
part of our problem in Arizona is to make sure that we have appropriate services for those kids so they graduate and are successful.
Because we, by statute, have to educate these kids.
Well, and they're going to be part of our once
exactly
they graduate,
right.
They're part of our population.
And we do have a high poverty. Our poverty rates are certainly higher than you look at some of the surrounding states, and so that's an issue that you see K-12 education can absolutely combat. And so that's where we're really dedicated to making sure the leaders and teachers, it's really about the human capital. 80% of any structure in a K-12 education is going to be for teachers. And so we need to be saying that these are the people that are front line of defense.
Let's take a look, tape number 2. This is a video of Doug Ducey. I just want to get your brief grade on him so far. It's early. But based on what you heard in the campaign, based on what he's been able to deliver so far, how has he done, Eileen?
So Governor Ducey took the helm in a really rough time, and because he has placed an absolute priority on K-12 education and what works in education, I would give the governor right now a solid B and hope to move that up. But just right now, he hasn't had time to implement his plan.
Or the money.
Or the money.
That's the biggie, right,
But he's
Chuck?
made it a priority, the top priority.
I don't think he realized when he was running for election how bad the state general fund was going to be.
He should know, though. He was the treasurer. He should know.
Well, the treasurer is a little bit different. They had plenty of cash because they have over $500 million in the rainy day fund. So as a treasurer, when you looked at the state, kind of like you go to somebody's bank account, and they have plenty of money in their bank account, but you have to know what are the obligations that are coming down the road that you're going to have to use those dollars for. So as a treasurer, he knew the state had plenty of cash.
Do you think this is priority one with him right now?
K-12 education?
Figuring out the education.
I think it's certainly one of his top priorities, and he's hired some really good people. Don Wallace, who's his education advisor, does a really good job.
Got to take a quick break here. We're back on Newsmaker Sunday. We'll talk about the, what did you call it?
Pathway of hope.
Pathway of hope, if there is one. We'll talk about it on Newsmaker Sunday. Back on Newsmaker Sunday, talking to Chuck Essigs, who's an expert on education and education funding, and Eileen Sigmund, who's the president and CEO of the Arizona Charter Schools Association. Let me put up some video of Diane Douglas, the new state school superintendent. She campaigned really on one issue. We're going to do away with Common Core. That did not happen now. For 2 straight sessions, legislators, even dominated by conservatives over there, many of whom do not like Common Core. In the end, they would not do away with Common Core. Why, Chuck?
Well, because I think they see the value when they talk to people in the business community and they talk to school people. They see the value.
That you need a standard.
You need a standard, and you need a high standard. Now, does that mean some minor tweaks couldn't be made to it? You look at it and make sure everything is the right way, and the standards are the right standards, and make some modifications. I think if she talks to business people, she talks to the school districts, she'll see a lot of support for Common Core.
Eileen, this is very basic, but I think a lot of people, when they think about charters, if they don't have their kids in charters, they assume that you guys are operating under a different set of rules. Not true. You've got to do all the testing that every other school does in charters.
Correct.
So Common Core is part of your deal, too.
Correct. And that's been the law since charters were created, that we've always had to be taking the test to make sure our students know certain basic principles. So, for example, you want them to read by 3rd grade. That is something that will be tested, and we'll have what you measure you can improve upon. And certainly charters now are really subject to what I call the accountability hammer. Mm-hmm. If they're not meeting the metrics of improving student achievement, the state agency is really, they're closing schools.
You have unbelievable charters, I think, of Basis, I think, of Great Hearts, that the test scores are just off the chart. Across the board, do charters outperform the traditional public schools?
So when you look at our charters, we certainly have seen in the 2014 academic results great strides. And like I said, it's 3/4 or A or B or improve their letter grade. Are we completely like 5-10 points ahead of districts? We're not there yet, but we do have a lot of different pockets. And again, it's always going to come down to the human capital.
Right. We got a minute left. Chuck, I want to give you 30 seconds. What do you think will fix this education issue in Arizona? Do you think there is a fix out there?
The fix is they have to find an additional dedicated source of revenues to go to schools, to allow them to have the resources for districts and charters that they need. And it's probably going to take a voter initiative to get that done. But I think you need.
How soon?
I don't know, but the sooner the better, because that's the only. That's the only. That's the only. Well, the Prop 301 has about 6 more years to go, but there's only 2 more general elections where it could be reauthorized. But I think they need. That's the only thing that's really going to make a difference in Arizona,
Eileen,
is to get the resources that we need.
I'll give you the final word. What do you think it'll take to fix this?
It'll take a concerted effort of looking at diversified revenue with expected outcomes of what we want for our students to know. You're going to need to have a lot of different tools at your tool chest to fix this. It's a $4.5 billion issue right now. It's going to grow larger.
Fixable?
This is fixable? Absolutely.
Okay.
Chuck did it in 1980.
Fixable with more resources.
Okay,
Right.
guys, thank you. Chuck, Eileen, great to see you again, and we'll have you back. Thank
Thanks.
you. On Newsmaker Sunday. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and get all the best videos from Fox 10.